It's strange how peaceful the outdoors feels. During the day, how forests, mountains, and open spaces give you a sense of calm, like you've escaped the noise of the world and stepped into something quieter, something more natural. But at night, that same peace can turn into something completely different. The silence becomes heavier, the darkness feels deeper, and the sense of isolation becomes impossible to ignore. Because when you're out there, far away from cities and people, there's nothing separating you from whatever might be hiding beyond the reach of your light. Tonight, I'm going to share three true horror stories from camping trips. Moments that started as simple getaways and turned into experiences that those people still can't fully explain. And these aren't just quick scares or small incidents. These are the kind of moments that change the way you look at the dark forever. The first story comes from a group of friends who decided to go camping deep in a forest area, a place known for its beautiful scenery and quiet trails. Far enough from the main road that once you were there, you couldn't hear anything from the outside world. They arrived late in the afternoon, set up their tents near a small clearing, and spent the evening like any normal camping trip, talking, eating, and enjoying the calm atmosphere as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. At first, the night felt peaceful, the kind of silence that makes you feel relaxed. But as the hours passed and the fire burned lower, that silence began to feel different. Not empty, but heavy, like the forest itself was listening. Around midnight, they decided to put out the fire and go to sleep, each of them heading into their tents, expecting nothing more than a quiet night. For a while, everything was normal. Just the occasional rustling of leaves and distant sounds of the forest. But then, one of them heard something that didn't feel right. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving just beyond the edge of their campsite. At first, he thought it might be an animal, something passing through the area, but the pattern didn't match. The steps were too even, too controlled, like someone walking carefully. He stayed still inside his tent, listening, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. And then he realized it wasn't moving past the campsite. It was circling it. The footsteps moved slowly around them, never getting too close, never going too far, just staying at the edge of the clearing as if something was walking around their tents, keeping its distance but never leaving. His heartbeat started to pick up as he listened, unsure of what to do. He considered waking the others, but something about the situation made him hesitate, like making noise might draw attention to them. The footsteps continued for several minutes, steady and quiet, until suddenly they stopped. The silence that followed felt unnatural, too still. He held his breath, waiting to hear something, anything. And then, from somewhere just outside his tent, he heard a voice, soft, low, calling out one of his friend's names. His entire body went cold. The voice didn't sound loud or aggressive. It sounded calm, almost familiar. But there was something wrong with it. It didn't sound like it was coming from a distance. It sounded like it was right there, just outside the tent. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just lay there, completely still, hoping it would go away. A few seconds passed. Then the voice came again, this time slightly clearer, repeating the same name, slowly, as if it was waiting for an answer. Inside the other tents, no one reacted. No movement, no sound. It was as if he was the only one hearing it. The fear in his chest grew stronger, but he forced himself to stay silent. After what felt like minutes, the voice stopped. The footsteps didn't return. The forest went back to its normal quiet. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he must have fallen asleep without realizing it. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. The sunlight made the forest feel safe, the tension from the night fading slightly as they packed up their things. He almost convinced himself it had been a dream, something his mind created in the dark. Until one of his friends said something that made his stomach drop. That friend mentioned hearing someone call his name during the night. The exact same way, the exact same voice, and he hadn't responded either. A heavy silence fell over the group as they realized that more than one of them had heard it. They checked the area around the campsite, expecting to find footprints, signs of someone being there, anything that could explain what happened. But there was nothing. No tracks, no disturbances, just untouched ground surrounding their tents. They left the forest soon after, not wanting to stay any longer than necessary. And even now, none of them have gone back to that place again, because a part of them still believes that whatever was moving around their campsite that night wasn't just passing through. It was trying to get their attention, trying to get one of them to respond. And they don't know what would have happened if someone actually did. The second story comes from a solo camper, someone who preferred being alone in nature, away from people, away from noise, believing the solitude made the experience more peaceful, more real. And for years, he had gone on camping trips like this without any issues, setting up his tent in remote areas, hiking during the day, and resting at night under quiet skies that felt endless. This particular trip was no different at the start. He had chosen a spot deep within a forest trail, far enough from the main path that he knew no one else would be nearby. A small clearing surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the outside world. He arrived in the late afternoon, set up his tent, gathered some wood, and spent the evening in complete calm, the kind of silence that feels relaxing when you're used to it. As night fell, the temperature dropped slightly, and the forest grew darker in a way that felt heavier than usual. But he ignored it, telling himself it was just the normal shift that happens when daylight disappears. He ate, checked his supplies, and eventually went inside his tent, turning off his light and settling into sleep. For a while, everything was normal. The distant sounds of the forest, leaves moving, occasional branches shifting, nothing out of place. But then, sometime deep into the night, he woke up suddenly. There was no clear reason at first, no loud noise, no obvious disturbance, just that instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. He stayed still, listening carefully, his eyes open in the darkness of the tent, trying to understand what had woken him. And then he heard it. A soft sound, right outside, not far, not distant. Close enough that it felt like it was just beyond the thin fabric separating him from the outside. It sounded like something lightly brushing against the ground, slow, dragging, moving around the tent. His body tensed instantly. He held his breath, focusing on the sound as it continued, circling slowly, never stopping, never rushing, just moving in a steady pattern around him. At first, he thought it might be an animal, something investigating the campsite, but the movement didn't feel random. It felt controlled, intentional, like whatever was outside knew exactly where he was. The sound continued for what felt like several minutes, never getting closer, never moving away, just staying at the same distance as it circled. His mind raced, trying to decide what to do, whether to make noise to scare it away, or stay completely silent and hope it left on its own. But before he could act, the sound stopped. Instantly, the silence that followed was overwhelming, too complete, too still. He remained frozen, listening, waiting for it to start again, but nothing happened. Seconds passed, then more, and just as he started to think it might be over, he heard something else. A soft pressure against the side of the tent. Not scratching, not brushing, pressing, like something was leaning against it. His heart began to pound, each beat louder in his ears as the fabric of the tent shifted slightly inward under the pressure. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just stared at the spot, his eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness, and then he saw it. A shape forming on the surface of the tent. Not clear, not detailed, but definitely there. Taller than it should have been. Still, completely still. The pressure remained for a few seconds, and then slowly, it moved. The shape slid along the side of the tent, stretching slightly as it shifted position, moving from one side toward the entrance. His entire body locked up, fear taking over completely now. Because whatever it wasn't acting like an animal. It wasn't sniffing, scratching, or moving erratically. It was deliberate, controlled, almost careful. The shape stopped near the entrance of the tent. And then, without any warning, there was a soft sound at the zipper, a faint movement, like something touching it, testing it. He felt a wave of panic rush through him instantly. Every instinct told him not to react, not to make a sound, not to acknowledge whatever was outside. The zipper moved slightly, just a fraction, enough to make a quiet metallic sound. He closed his eyes tightly, his breathing shallow, waiting for something worse to happen. But it didn't. The movement stopped. The pressure disappeared. The shape was gone. Just like that. Silence returned. Real silence this time. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. He stayed awake for the rest of the night, too afraid to move, too afraid to even check outside. And when morning finally came, the sunlight didn't feel as comforting as it should have. Slowly, cautiously, he unzipped the tent and stepped out. His eyes scanning the ground immediately, expecting to see tracks, signs, anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No footprints, no marks, not even disturbed leaves around the tent. It was as if nothing had been there at all. He packed up his things quickly, leaving the area without hesitation, and didn't look back. Later, when he thought about it, one detail stayed with him more than anything else. It wasn't just that something had been outside his tent. It was the way it moved, the way it paused at the entrance, the way it touched the zipper, like it understood what it was, like it knew exactly how close it could get, and that if it wanted to, it could have come inside. The third story comes from a man who went on a solo camping trip to a remote mountain area, a place that required hours of hiking to reach, far beyond any marked trails. The kind of location chosen specifically for its isolation, where there were no nearby campsites, no signal, and no chance of running into other people. He had planned the trip carefully, bringing enough supplies for a few days. confident in his experience, and comfortable with being completely alone in nature. He reached the spot just before sunset, a small flat area surrounded by uneven terrain and scattered trees, and quickly set up his tent, wanting to settle in before darkness fully took over. As the sun disappeared, the temperature dropped sharply, and the environment changed in a way that felt more intense than usual. The kind of cold silence that settles into places untouched by noise. Still, he didn't think much of it. He ate, checked his gear, and went into his tent, preparing to rest for the night. For a while, everything was normal. The wind moved faintly through the trees. The distant sounds of nature remained steady, and he eventually fell asleep. But sometime later, he woke up suddenly. This time, there was a reason. A sound, faint but distinct. It was coming from outside the tent. He stayed still, listening carefully, his mind slowly waking up as the sound became clearer. It was footsteps, slow, measured, walking across the ground nearby. At first he thought it might be another hiker, someone who had somehow ended up in the same area, but the pattern didn't feel right. The steps weren't random. They weren't searching. They followed a path, a deliberate one. The footsteps moved past his tent and then stopped. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. He held his breath, waiting, expecting to hear movement again, but nothing happened. Seconds passed. Then, without warning, a voice spoke, soft, low, calm. It said something simple. "You shouldn't be here." His entire body tensed instantly. The voice didn't sound far away. It sounded close. Too close. Just beyond the thin layer of fabric separating him from whatever was outside. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just listened, his heart pounding in his chest. After a few seconds, the voice spoke again. Same tone, same calm delivery, repeating the same words, not louder, not more aggressive, just consistent, as if it wasn't trying to scare him. It was stating a fact. He swallowed, forcing himself to stay silent, but his mind was racing now, trying to understand who could be out there, how someone could have found him in a place like this. Then suddenly, the footsteps started again. But this time, they didn't move away. They circled the tent, slowly, deliberately, staying close, too close. The sound of each step pressed into the silence, making it feel even heavier. And then, something changed. The footsteps stopped directly behind him, not outside in the distance, right there, just behind the section of the tent where his head rested. He froze completely, every muscle locked, his breathing shallow as he stared at the fabric in front of him. And then, he saw it, a shadow, faint at first, then clearer, a shape forming against the tent, taller than it should have been, completely still. The outline didn't shift like a normal person would. It didn't move with natural motion, it just existed, pressed against the thin barrier between him and whatever was outside. Seconds passed. Then the shape leaned slightly forward. The fabric of the tent moved inward just a little, reacting to the pressure. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away. And then the voice came again, but this time it sounded different. Not just outside, not just behind him. It sounded closer, much closer, as if it wasn't being heard through the tent anymore, as if it was right next to him. It said, "You're still here." His mind went completely blank for a second, unable to process what that meant, because the voice didn't match the position of the shadow. The shadow was outside, but the voice wasn't. Panic hit instantly. Without thinking, he grabbed his flashlight and turned it on, pointing it toward the side of the tent where the shadow had been. The light filled the space immediately, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no movement, nothing outside, just empty ground. The footsteps were gone. The voice was gone. Everything had stopped. He didn't turn off the light for the rest of the night. He didn't sleep. He just sat there, staring at the walls of the tent, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Morning eventually came, the sunlight breaking through the trees, making everything look normal again, almost peaceful, like the night hadn't happened at all. Slowly he stepped outside, scanning the area carefully, expecting to find footprints, signs, anything that could explain what had been there. But there was nothing. No tracks, no disturbances, just untouched ground surrounding the tent. He packed up immediately, leaving the area without hesitation, not stopping until he was far away from that place. But even now, one detail stays with him, something he can't explain, something he can't forget. It wasn't just the voice or the shadow. It was the moment when he realized that the two didn't match, that whatever he saw outside wasn't what he heard inside, and that whatever had spoken to him that night hadn't been separated from him by the tent at all. It had already been closer than he thought. And the most disturbing thing about these camping stories isn't just what happened in each moment. It's what they all seem to suggest. Because in every case, the people weren't in crowded places. They weren't surrounded by noise or distractions. They were completely alone, deep in locations where nothing should have been there except them. And yet, something was. A voice calling out from the darkness, footsteps circling just beyond sight. A presence that didn't behave like anything natural. 3 different experiences, but the same feeling running through all of them. That quiet realization that the isolation they were looking for wasn't real. Because when you remove all the noise, all the light, all the people, you don't just create silence. You create space. Space where every small sound matters. Space where every movement feels amplified. And maybe space where something else can exist without being noticed. And that's what makes these moments stay with people long after they leave. Not just the fear they felt at the time, but the thought that what they experienced wasn't random, wasn't just a coincidence, but something that noticed them the moment they stepped into that environment. Because think about it, in all 3 stories, there's a pattern that's hard to ignore. None of these things rushed, none of them attacked, none of them revealed themselves fully. They stayed just out of reach, just beyond understanding, like they weren't trying to harm. They were trying to observe, to get closer, to see how far they could go without being acknowledged. And maybe that's the part that feels the most unsettling, because it suggests intention, awareness, control. It suggests that whatever exists in those places knows exactly when you're alone, knows exactly when there's no one else around to notice, and chooses those moments to appear. Not fully, not clearly, just enough to be felt, just enough to be remembered. And maybe that's why people who experience things like this don't go back, not because they're afraid of what they saw, but because they're afraid of what they didn't see, the parts that stayed hidden, the things that were there without making themselves known. So the next time you think about going somewhere remote, somewhere quiet, somewhere completely cut off from everything else, take a moment and think about what that really means. Because being alone doesn't always mean being by yourself. Sometimes it just means there's no one else around to tell you that something else is there too. And if something is watching, something waiting, something that only moves when everything else is still, you might never notice it clearly. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And by the time you feel it, it might already be closer than you think.